Alright, class, we're back. Today we want to talk about just the Locarno Springs agreement, and also I'm going to first start off with recapping the Ruhr crisis and make sure we're all on the same page. Alright? So, just to review and recap, the Ruhr crisis, it basically boiled down to French attempts to get Germany to repay its obligations from the Treaty of Versailles and those reparation payments. All right. So Germany, of course, they defaulted on their loans and they missed the delivery of timber as part of their repayments. All right. The French declared Germany in default, and despite objections from the British, on 11 January 1923, French and Belgian troops invaded a really coal-rich area of France known as the Ruhr. All right. And of course, once again, the French objective was just to collect those reparation payments. And they did this through seizing the output of the mines and factories of the Ruhr and then shipping those to France. All right. However, the Germans, they acted on this passive resistance. They failed to cooperate. A lot of them went on strike, sought to sabotage and prevent the French from obtaining material. All right, for example, the flooding the mines, the burning the factories, and so forth and so on. Many were imprisoned, and this violence led to the death of a number of protesters. One of the main things that you see is there was this hyperinflation, all right, that resulted from the French invasion. And the Weimar government, which is the government that was set up in Germany. And in order to support the workers in the Ruhr in their strike actions, the government simply sort of tried to print more money, which caused inflation. So the value of goods went down, and paper money, sort of just became worthless. All right. So many sort of were vulnerable, and people were poor, they were hungry, there weren't a lot of uh, ways in order to stabilize the economy, so to speak. And this is going to appeal to a lot of people, the fact that Hitler was sort of speaking this um, communist, this takeover of the government, and he did have this failed attempt at this time to seize power. All right. But that sort of was put down in the beer hall push, all right, which is something that you can recap or look up a little bit later, all right. But right now, just sort of see that the fact that money was worthless during this time period in that Ruhr crisis, all right. So, just to recap here, Gustav Stresemann, all right, he was appointed the new Chancellor of Germany, and he called off this whole passive resistance in the Ruhr and announced that Germany would comply with her obligations under the Treaty of Versailles. All right. And the French were also willing to come to an agreement, all right, because as we've seen, the Ruhr crisis was a failure and it did damage relations with the United Kingdom and the U.S., or Great Britain and the U.S., all right. One of the main things we see with the aftermath of the Ruhr is the fact that the U.S. was a main key player, all right, and the reparations issue had triggered U.S. involvement because the Allies owed money to the U.S., all right, talking about Great Britain and France, and they were expecting their reparation payments from Germany. So the U.S. was the wealthiest power in the world, and they wanted the reparation payment. Excuse me. All right, so that's what we had, the whole Dawes plan that was set up, and it allowed Germany to schedule her payment so that the total amount was reduced and the deadlines were extended. Um, and Germany received large grants of money from the U.S. All right, and this was to be invested in the economy and promote business ventures to stabilize the market and the economy so people could gain employment and also output, all right, within the economy. And then the money and the revitalization of the economy can then uh, go to help repay the war debts. All right, and so we see this sort of diagram again. I'm just reiterating this between the USA, Germany, France, just to give you an example. All right. And also during this time period, we see this policy of fulfillment, the resolution of the Ruhr crisis, and their willingness to work with the Allies was part of an important policy decision that was made in Germany prior to the Ruhr crisis. All right. Now, the government decided that it would be useless to try to just outright defy the terms of the Treaty of Versailles or to try to get it modified. So they decided that they would comply as much as possible and try to convince the Allies that Germany was worthy of some revisions to the quote-unquote harsh terms of the Treaty of Versailles, based on good citizenship, good behavior, so to speak, and cooperation. All right, so Stresemann and his successors did adopt this whole policy, and it did prove to be successful, and a lot of concessions were granted to Germany. All right, and of course, when Hitler rose to power in the 1930s, the policy was discontinued. All right, one of the things that we're going to see, though, is this Locarno Treaty, all right, which is an agreement that was signed in 1925 by Great Britain, France, Germany, and Belgium. All right, and basically, when we talk about this whole policy of fulfillment and this Locarno Treaty, is the fact that Germany agreed to accept the western borders as determined at the Versailles Settlement. All right. Now, Germany accepted its borders with France and Belgium as permanent, and these borders were guaranteed by the UK and Italy. All right, and what does that mean? That means if one of anyone broke the agreement, Britain and Italy would assist the state which was being attacked. So, if Germany or France broke the agreement, breached the terms of the western boundaries, then Italy and France would Italy and Great Britain would sort of take sides. All right, so these borders were set, and neither side would seek to be the aggressor. All right, so what were these implications? All right. Well, one of the things that we're going to see is that this was only on the western border, all right? We're talking about the border shared with France. Now, on the eastern side, Germany did sign agreements with Poland and Czechoslovakia, which basically was about arbitration over possible land disputes. All right, we had the port city of Danzig, the free port city, and other areas, the Polish corridor, that were still up for dispute. All right, there were sort of some areas of contention. All right, but there was no guarantee on these eastern borders. All right, Britain did not put any guarantee on any of the eastern borders, and it was just solely on the west. Now, this allowed Germany to assume that her eastern borders could be changed with little objection from the Allies. Ha, key point there. All right. And there was this agreement that France would help Poland and Czechoslovakia if Germany attacked them. But like I said, there was no guarantee on this. So this sort of gave Germany its free hand in the east, all right? And there was nothing to sort of set those boundaries, those eastern boundaries that were created as a result of the Treaty of Versailles. Now, what does this whole idea of the spirit of Locarno mean? And this was this overall sense of euphoria that was known as the spirit of Locarno. Excuse me. All right. It was seen. This Locarno agreement was seen as a breakthrough in French and German relations and the security of France. So France didn't feel threatened by Germany anymore because of this whole agreement, and so many people were happy that the western border sort of was protected, and Germany sort of was rehabilitated in a sense without posing a severe threat to Western Europe. All right. As a result of this, Germany joined the League of Nations and obtained a permanent seat on the League Council. And eventually, the Allies removed troops from the left bank of the Rhine. All right. So you see the map here. The Allied Commission supervised German disarmament departed in 1927, and by 1930, basically all occupation armies had left Germany and became an independent state. So after this Locarno Pact, we see Germany sort of being revitalized, all right, becoming more of an independent country. We have the western boundaries and borders sort of protected with France, and the eastern border sort of not quite, all right. Now, one of the key things that we should look at also would be the Soviet Union and the Locarno Treaty. The Soviet Union saw this treaty as deepening, its political isolation in Europe. All right, of course, with the communist government in the Soviet Union, um, no one really wanted to sort of interact with this communist regime. All right, and the Soviets sort of felt like Germany was detaching itself with the understandings from the Treaty of Rapallo. So, in an attempt to sort of sever those ties, Germany and Soviet Union going to sign the Treaty of Berlin in 1926, which each pledged neutrality in the event of an attack on the other by a third party for the next 5 years. And so this non-aggression treaty reaffirmed the German-Soviet Treaty of Treaty of Rapallo that was signed in 1922, which is very important. All right. So this Locarno Honeymoon, the Kellogg-Briand Pact in 1927, as tensions sort of eased after Germany joined the League. The USA and France, all right, one was represented by a former U.S. senator who was for the League of Nations and the Treaty of Versailles, Frank Kellogg, and Aristide Briand, who was the French premier. They renounced the use of war for national objectives. Eventually, 65 states joined. And however, limitations of this treaty and things that were not addressed was that there was no mention of sanctions against any state which broke its pledge. And Japan actually signed this Kellogg-Briand Pact, but within the next 3 years, they're going to invade Manchuria or China. All right. So, what was the overall impact of the Locarno Agreement? Well, they really didn't solve some of the problems. All right. The League was not strengthened, and the principle of collective security remained uncertain. All right. And I put that the fact that Germany did not agree to accept, her eastern borders, they continued cooperating with the USR, the Soviet Union, in the Treaty of Rapallo, and of course, this whole disarmament clause was sort of circumvented, as we've seen before. So, with the Treaty of Rapallo, and the Locarno spirit was closely tied to the economic health of Europe. All right, so throughout the early part of 1920s, we were starting to see an economic boom, all right, and a lot of economic revitalization in Europe, and reparations were being repaid, and all of these ideologies and political extremism were they were disappearing, all right. And so that's sort of what we have here, gang. Please, please, please look at this, all right, and that's it.